Hello and welcome back to the Comic Lyric Podcast, the podcast where I, Ryan, also soon to be known as Comic Stan, get my real book nerd of a bloke co-host, make him read some comics, and then talk about the good, the bad, and the mid of it all. And with me, as always, is my aforementioned disguising co-host. It's Jamie.
Hello, I like the new intro.
It's a new intro. It's workshop today. Actually wrote it down this time.
Well done.
So we'll see how it goes.
I like it. I think it could do with a little bit of streamlining like the first one did.
I feel I was trying to get in all the meanings I was trying to get.
Yeah.
Describing you in your relation to the theme, the premise of the podcast was kind of the most difficult part.
That makes sense.
So I was like, how to describe as a literature fan? I thought book nerd was quite succinct.
Yeah, I like book nerd.
Because even though you are reading comics now and you are bordering on that you're becoming a comic aficionado, just
I think
by
so.
osmosis. But I feel like your core is still literature and books, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was trying to get across that. Also, of a bloke. I just love, I like British stuff like that because I don't use them much daily.
I discovered recently that a bunch of British insults are going out of fashion. So pillock, prat, plonker are all just disappearing from the British lexicon in lieu of more Americanized insults.
Yeah, to be fair, I don't like those, so I don't use those often.
And neither do I. But is that just because they sound a bit antiquated now? They sound a bit old fashioned.
Yeah, they do, and they just sound a bit ridiculous as well. They sound like Charles Dickens' novel.
You plonker, Rodney.
Well, that as well, which is far more recent. But in current scripting of some YouTube video, which hopefully will be out soon at some point. Always right over the horizon. But in that, avoiding using swears for that kind of scripting, I think the best thing is I'm using bloody a lot and bollocks and those.
Bloody is part of your lexicon anyway, though. You use bloody quite a lot anyway.
I'll be using it more on YouTube though.
Bloody hell, Harry!
Because it'll replace other words that I would I don't care about swearing on YouTube or not, but it's that thing of I don't think algorithm does really.
The algorithm is not a fan.
But you're better if you don't use them, I think. Even though a lot of my favorite YouTubers do use them.
Something else that I recently was thinking about as well, this again was based on an Instagram reel, is that in British English we have a really charming way that we can turn any noun into an insult as long as you put the word absolute in front of it.
Yeah, that's kind of been joined in with as a very Gen X millennial thing of take a normal random word and add a swear word to it and you've got a new insult. I think that's now become an overworn trope now.
Yes.
That now younger generations are making fun of. Because when we were young, that was the hip new thing.
And again,
was a big one.
Cockwomble. Fuck stick. But again, it's I could take any item in this room and be like, oh, Ryan is being an absolute mic stand today.
Yes.
And people are like, oh, I get it. It's an insult.
Yeah, I think that started with the first earliest version of that would be absolute weapon.
Yeah.
You'd be an absolute weapon.
Or an absolute unit.
It doesn't mean anything. Absolute unit is so unit is of measurement. So it doesn't mean anything. But so we put absolute as
An ounce is a unit.
Do you want to hear my dumb idea for a comic? By the way, we're doing Transformers. We will get into it. Back to the Energon universe, baby. We are going back to that, but very quickly.
You're trying to we've both come into this quite low energy and relaxed, and you're trying to raise that energy level.
Well, we were discussing exactly why we're low energy.
I have a dog asleep on my lap.
Yeah, that can mellow you out.
I don't want to wake him.
He'd make a great therapy dog, but all the therapy would have to be done where he lives, because otherwise he'll just be overstimulated. But I have a dumb idea for a comic,
Go on
then. Or a superhero-esque superpowers kind of thing. It's a old, not even old, a shaman kind of character who lives in the jungle, uncontacted tribe kind of thing.
Okay.
Fish out of water, comes into the city, bit Crocodile Dundee, bit Bulletproof Monk, that kind of thing.
George of the Jungle.
Bit George of the Jungle, yeah. But the super aspect is that he would get powers by doing some kind of concoction of potions or something, but with certain animals' shit.
Nice.
But specifically because I've not just picked that out of a weird random fetch or nothing like that. It's because it would use the phrases of you'll see the connection, for example. If he took ape shit, he would become crazy angry.
Batshit.
Go insane.
Horse shit.
He'd lie really well or something. And I thought oh, that's a fun thing. But I was would people be interested in a superhero who inhales shit to get his powers? Probably not.
Well, make it and they will come.
I mean, it could be the new like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Well, yeah, this is it. I mean, we're about to do a Transformers comic, and that's not exactly the most grounded idea. What would the comic be called?
It'd have to be like a play on one of the like ape shit or something.
Batshit crazy.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. The only one I couldn't figure out was like, where would dog shit come into it? Because that's just bad. That's like, why would you have that as what power would that be?
So there could be a special concession where instead of doing dog shit, he did dog's bollocks, and he just got really good at everything.
Yeah, but I don't want to encourage like taking the balls of dogs. Like,
I mean, that's pretty normal practice. If you caught any vet before crematorium day,
you got those dog bollocks go. Or if he took like the insect legs, it was like, these are the bee's knees.
Exactly.
Like, really good.
Do you know where the expression dog's bollocks comes from?
Meatballs?
No, weirdly enough. You know Meccano?
Vaguely.
So Meccano used to they'd do 2 versions of every set, Box Standard and Box Deluxe. And those 2 names then became Bog Standard and the Dog's Bollocks.
So Cockney rhyming slang is it's pretty much every British euphemism I think comes from
it's not Cockney rhyming slang. So Bog Standard, it just like they over time replaced the X with a G to get Bog Standard. And then Dog's Bollocks is just Box Deluxe, but with the B and the D flipped round, right?
Right. Yeah. Just the weird British things that sometimes happen in our language for
absolutely.
No reason. Yeah. So yes, Transformers. That is what we, again, like I said, back to the Energon universe, baby.
Yeah. So is this a new one?
This is a new one, started last year, and as I mentioned to you in suggesting it, it's a Eisner Award nominated series.
Have we literally done like 3 Eisner, 4 Eisner Award?
We've done 4 on the trot, and the 2 weren't even planned.
No, the 2 we didn't even know. We were just ahead of the curve there, weren't we?
We were just cutting edge. I mean, people were talking about them, so maybe that's how they came into our purview. But I like to think we're on the cutting edge of the comic book conversation.
I think so. Yeah. I think we are. We are the sharp edge.
And I feel like we would have done this anyway, because I saw, even before this nominated, I saw this being mentioned of like being really good.
Yes.
And the problem was, I saw it was like a Reddit post or something. It was like, oh, the Transformers comic is really good. Like, and I was like, maybe we should do that. And then like one of the people who was saying how good it was like, yeah, it's great. Like Void Rivals. I was like, oh, that's not a great comparison.
So this is in the same universe as Void Rivals,
Same
right?
universe, the Energon universe. And can you remember the other one?
G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe, yes.
Which is just weird to me. It's still a bit weird to me because there wasn't any G.I. Joe antics here.
There was. You might not have noticed it. It was subtle.
Oh, all the blokes were former soldiers. They'd all been in a war.
Even that. It was more subtle than that. We'll get into it because I think it'll be good to once we get to that point. But the main thing that I also picked out, the main reason I also picked it out for was because this is another written and drawn by one person.
Oh, interesting.
And that one person is Daniel Warren Johnson. And can you take a guess? I know you don't know, but could you take a guess what they've done before that we've read?
Yes, I will take a guess. Darren, what was the name again?
Daniel Warren Johnson.
I recognise the name. Was it an early one? Is this deep? Is this a comic literate deep cut?
Not that deep. It was a big one from last year. I was a big fan of it. That's the biggest clue I'll give you.
You really liked it. I didn't really.
I think you appreciated it. I think you liked it, but I was a massive fan. I was a massive fan before we read it. Before I read it, I was a massive fan.
Right. Okay.
That's the biggest clue I can give you. Before I even read it, I was like,
was it something Marvel?
No.
I can't think.
He wrote and drew Do a Powerbomb.
Oh, and you know what? In retrospect, that makes a lot of sense.
The art is very similar.
Very similar.
He's got a very certain style, which not to tread kind of similar ground, but I was very much into. We'll get to it with the arting. The other person I think is worth mentioning is the colorist, Mike Spicer. Color is a big part of this, I feel like, so it's definitely worth mentioning as well.
Who did the lettering?
Letterer was Russ Wooten.
Because I liked the lettering.
I never noticed the lettering, and that's a fault on me, because like I have a thing where I'm like, how important is the lettering? But I don't know if I've seen bad lettering, so I can't compare.
Yeah. What was it? I was speaking with a friend last night who is he's a fucking art editor for a magazine. And we were talking about typography and lettering, and he was telling me about a sign that somebody had put up in his university, which was like bad lettering screams or something. Like you only notice bad lettering, or bad typography. And yeah, and we I literally had this conversation yesterday. Yeah, you'll only ever notice bad typography, bad lettering. But I liked the lettering here. Did you notice that he used different letters for the Autobots and Decepticons and the humans?
Yes. So I guess that is lettering. Yeah, I didn't even consider that.
Yeah, that's the lettering, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a thing in Marvel where they'll have different colors for speeches.
Yes.
So there's a common thing about Deadpool where all his speech is in yellow.
Yes.
And people kind of wondered, like, because before he was in live action at all, you only saw him on the comic page. So it's like what that point of that was. And apparently that is meant to denote the part of the Deadpool characters, he is literally riddled with cancer. And that's not a callous overuse of the term. Like, no, his body riddled. Is literally constantly dying and regenerating. Yeah. He's got cancer literally everywhere. So the point was his voice was meant to be quite rough from the cancer in his throat, and his voice was meant to be quite rough and coarse. Problem is they never bothered including that in the films and everything. So now it's his vocal stuff, his speech bubbles are still yellow.
Yeah.
But now people are like, well, what's the point now? Because it's kind of in everyone's head that he sounds like Ryan Reynolds.
Yes.
To everyone.
And I suppose Ryan Reynolds has a pretty unique vocal characteristic, doesn't he?
He has a cadence for sure. Yeah. Like a comedic cadence.
Yes. He's a funny man. I find him very funny.
But I would imagine, like, if I hadn't seen any kind of live action stuff, I would imagine Deadpool would literally be like, talk like,
like
look like Ryan Reynolds, like that kind of. Yeah.
I look like Ryan.
He actually, that's a line from a comic. Before Ryan Reynolds was cast, he was talking about his face. There was a period of time, and I think this was best Deadpool writing, when he was really insecure about how he looked.
Because he was so gnarled.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he still looks gnarled, but they've just like, maybe it's his personal growth, like his character arc. He's comfortable with how he looks now, which is a great message. But there was a point where when he was self-conscious about it, he described himself as a cross between Ryan Reynolds and a Shar-Pei. And then they cast Ryan Reynolds.
I mean, he was the obvious choice, wasn't he?
Yes. I mean, we've gone over all the connections of like them being both Canadian and everything like that.
And Ryan Reynolds having played him before as well is quite fun.
Yeah, well, maybe that original casting, because I think there was a plan to spin him off after that. Except the reception to Wolverine Origins was so bad. So.
And Bruce Wayne, and what was his name? Bruce Wade?
Wade Wilson.
And Wade Wilson in that film particularly.
Yes,
exactly. Just wasn't particularly well received, was he?
Well, especially by the end.
Transformers.
Energon universe, baby.
Robots in disguise.
So we've done the Void Rivals, and we talked a bit about Transformers there.
Yeah.
Just to briefly go over, I think we're both as far removed from Transformers as one could possibly be.
Yeah.
Apart from I've seen a couple of the films, and they're awful. So... But it makes a good comparison to...
I've seen some of the earlier animated films that I liked.
Yeah, I've heard the animated stuff is very good. Apparently Transformers, the movie, is the best toy advert ever produced.
Yes.
Classic trivia for that as well is it was the last role of... I can't remember his name.
Yes, you talked about this in the last episode.
I will pause and cut out the pause until I can remember it.
Yeah.
Orson Welles. It was Orson Welles' last performance, and he was a big planet-eating evil transformer or something.
Yeah, he was a Decepticon.
Yes, I guess so, yeah. So, yeah, we know that's how much we've kind of come into with it. So before we touch anything else, what was your general thoughts and interaction with this?
I liked it.
I was surprised by how much I liked it.
Yeah, I was surprised by it because, again, so I don't engage with the title much before I read it. So Ryan tells me what we're reading. I find it, I read it. And then, I don't really look at the cover. I just kind of start pounding through it. And when I saw it was a title out of this new Energon universe, I was like, oh, oh no. And I was pleasantly surprised by it. I think the thing I enjoyed most about it was the way it looked. I liked the way it looked. But also the story. The story had enough of that kind of human... emotional element running through it for me. I didn't particularly like the way it was paced.
That's fair. I think that's a common thing with this kind of universe, isn't it? They're trying to get to places quite quickly, aren't they?
Yeah, and I couldn't really tell the timescales over which things were happening. Like, I remember because we read about 6 issues, didn't we?
Yes.
I remember,
first arc.
Yeah, so I remember getting to the end of the first arc, and I was like, this all feels like it happened on the same day.
Yeah, and I think that was meant to be the case, I feel like. But then there was a lot of like, let's retreat and go back to our base and reconvene. And I think they did that like 6 times in a day.
Yes. Well, this is it, isn't it?
But they might have, like, that's the thing.
But that would imply that it took place over longer than a day. But if it felt too brief for the time scale to be any longer than like a day or two. But also those relationships built and became really important to all these characters really, really quickly throughout the run. And so, yeah, so I didn't have a great sense of the time over which this took place. But again, you know, I also don't like that narrative device of 1 day later, 1 week later, 3 years later. So, yeah, I can't have my cake and eat it.
I feel like this probably did take place over a day, because if it had happened any longer than a day, and maybe this is a hope for what would happen afterwards, like past what we've read, I feel like the military and CIA and FBI would be like all over this any longer than a day. Like, I don't think they can do this shit and not have like the entire military response turn up and be like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, these are like, well, like G.I. Joe's not there yet, and his crew.
Yeah, and is this planned to be that big crossover title in the universe?
Yeah, it's gearing up. The Energon universe will have its own like universe spanning events, essentially,
right? Which
apparently will involve the Void Rivals characters as well.
But are the G.I. Joe guys going to be in their own separate run, and that's going to be...
So what's happening currently is there are runs for individual G.I. Joe characters.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think they've done... I could be wrong. I'm almost certain they haven't done a G.I. Joe title.
Yeah.
What they've done is they've done a title called Duke and a title Cobra Commander. So those are... big characters.
Cobra Commanders are the bad guys, aren't
yes,
they?
Yes, the main bad guy. Yeah. So they're doing those individual titles. And I think I think as for pacing of the actual individual stories, I think they are slowly building up the universe.
Yeah.
And so they're pacing themselves a lot more on the bigger scale.
Again, I think what we're now starting to see, and we saw this a little bit with Rogue Sun, and we're seeing it here, is third parties outside of the big two trying to bootstrap these big comic book universes that they can start like plotting stories into. But the interesting thing is that Marvel and DC never really intended for that to happen. And that happened organically over 50 years? We were quite, comics were quite developed before we started having these big cross-universe events, weren't they?
I think the difference is, and again, I might be wrong on this. This is kind of a loose idea of the past and everything. I think what happened was Marvel and DC back in the day, they had all these characters, and what they would do is they're crossing over. It wasn't so much big crossovers, because those big ones are remembered because they were so significant. If Crisis on Infinite Earth, Secret Wars, those kind of things. But what they would do a lot beforehand is they would have characters crossing over in each other's titles.
Yes.
And the reason is that they would be basically trying to use the more popular ones to get across the less popular ones.
So you'd throw Batman in something.
Yeah. Well, the biggest example is that, I know this was news to me, X-Men when it first started was not very popular.
Yeah.
It did not do well, apparently, commercially, until they hit the kind of second generation. So that's when you had your Storm, Wolverine, Colossus, Nightcrawler. But leading up to that, they would have the original X-Men team. They would be appearing in the more popular titles to try and be like, well, that was a fun adventure with you, Spider-Man. I'm just going to go back to the old Xavier Mansion, and you can catch our adventures every week, like that kind of.
Right. So they wouldn't put the more popular characters in the less popular titles to try and get you to buy those.
You put the unpopular ones in the titles that people are reading.
Which makes sense. That makes way more sense, doesn't it?
So I think they were doing that a bunch as a business strategy. And then I think it got to a point where people were like, hey, if these big things are happening, like if Superman is dealing with an end of the world problem, it's like, why is he calling it the Green Lanterns or Wonder Woman?
And this is what I mean. Like, that kind of interconnectedness evolved over time.
Yes.
And it became part of the necessity because they'd done these crossovers. Whereas what I mean now is like the people who made Rogue Sun and the guys who are producing this stuff, they're trying their endpoint.
Both Image Comics.
Both Image. So Image are now trying to create their own big universes.
Yes.
But they're aiming for that. That's like an end goal now, and they're engineering towards that, and they're creating these titles with the hope.
Yeah.
And so that's the one thing I would say for this and for Void Rivals is that it didn't. I got a sense of the fact that it was part of something bigger that I wasn't fully aware of, if that makes sense.
This still to me felt like an isolated title. Like if I didn't know about the larger Energon universe stuff, I would think this was just a Transformers comic.
Okay.
Like I didn't get that. It's one of those things like if you know it beforehand, you see it more.
Yes.
Whereas if you didn't know, would you kind of see it at all?
Yeah, potentially. And I suppose I went into it knowing that, didn't I? But I enjoyed it nonetheless.
I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it because I had kind of a lot of things going against this comic when I read it. The two main things being I don't really care about Transformers. And controversial statement, from the outside looking in, it looks stupid. I can say that because I'm into things which look stupid from the outside as well. Like that's just what happens when you get these weird things, and if you're not into it, it looks stupid from the outside. Again, I'm into pro wrestling. Like I live by the kind of like what you like kind of. I have to because otherwise, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
It had everything going against me for that. I was very tired while I was reading it. And especially as well, I've read comics that I like and enjoy and been too tired to read them. Like I literally like I find myself falling asleep because reading generally just makes you fall asleep.
Yeah.
But with this, I wanted to know what happened next issue. Like it was that good.
Yeah, it was page turning, wasn't it?
Every issue had that little cliffhanger. Where I didn't feel like, all right, making me read the next issue. I was just like, what's going to happen next?
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it, and I'm eager to get into the nitty gritty. But of course, at this point, we now get into the starting with the arting theme.
Which every week,
which we'll get to a point it will be every week soon. But we've always done it since the inception of the podcast anyway. Yeah. And the theme, as everyone knows, goes, and we're starting with the arting, and we're gonna talk about art.
I've ever since we've started, we're on episode 71. I never remember the second.
You just can never get a handle on it.
So.
Again, we're repeating ourselves a little bit. If you listen to the Do a Powerbomb episode, it's very similar art style.
The Do a Powerbomb episode was a long time ago, though.
Feels like it, yeah. I think it must have been mid last year, so maybe about a year ago. Maybe
we talked about it in our end of year lineup last year. Didn't we?
It was definitely it was a favorite of mine. I don't think it won anything, but that's it was one of those ones. It's like if any other year, it could have been for me, especially. It could have been Do a Powerbomb.
So. I sincerely think Do a Powerbomb was probably a stronger title than this.
I mean, for me especially, like, but I have that, bias going into it.
I mean, they're different. They're very, very different. So the artwork here.
I tell you what, while we're on Do a Powerbomb, did you notice the Transformers doing wrestling moves to each other?
Yes, I did.
Fucking loved that. And it wasn't just like bulk sound. Like there was your standard, so a clothesline and a German suplex. I was like, that's like the ones that people who might not be into it might know. And at one point, Optimus Prime gets a Transformer and does what's called a burning hammer on him, right? Now, burning hammer, for the tiniest little bit of pro wrestling I'm going to sneak into this episode.
You get one.
Burning hammer is a infamous wrestling move done by a Japanese wrestler from the 90s called Kenta Kobashi. And the reason it's infamous is because it's the most, and I'm not talking kayfabe here, I'm talking the most dangerous wrestling move you can do.
Kayfabe shoot.
So kayfabe is, if I said it's the most dangerous kayfabe move, it's within the pro wrestling universe.
Right, okay.
So if someone says like, bloody Undertaker's choke slam is devastating. It's like real life. It's like you literally just been picked up and dropped flat on your back. Yeah. Like that's a suplex.
But there's actually an inherent danger in doing this move in real life.
The burning hammer, if you didn't notice it, is that you pick someone up so they are facing their belly up on your shoulders and you drop them on their head. So
yes, I did see him do that. Yes,
and the reason it's so dangerous is because that's the hardest to protect yourself from.
Yeah.
Like what you literally, if you're receiving a burning hammer, you have to put your arms over your head, and you literally have to use like your bicep strength to stop your head breaking your fall. So like you're breaking fall with your arms, but because you're upside down, you are falling backwards on your head.
So it's quite technical. Actually receiving that is quite technical.
Yeah, doing it is easy. You just pick someone, drop them. But you've got to do it in a way, you've got to give them the clearance to like protect themselves safely. So yeah.
And I suppose the two wrestlers need to be like the right heights relative to each other and stuff. And
well, that needs to be taken into account. Absolutely. Yeah. It was such a dangerous move. This guy literally, the guy who popularized it in the 90s, he only ever did it 7 times across like,
oh wow, that's interesting.
Career. He only ever it was a pro wrestler he geared up as like he's so desperate, like he's gonna have to pull it out, the most dangerous move. Like it was kind of produced in that way. Yeah. And then when he did it, everyone's like, oh my god, we saw about an hour, like that kind of thing.
So it's clear that this guy, what's his name, Daniel Barron?
Daniel Warren Johnson.
So it's clear that Warren Johnson here is like a pro wrestling fan, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like he's done a title on pro wrestling. He's bringing it into this. Because the very limited amount of Transformers content I've consumed, it's very standard, like
shooting, punching,
isn't it? It's like martial arts. It's like martial arts and shooting.
I hope this becomes a thing, because like they're obviously going to do more films at once this comic universe gets off the ground properly. They're definitely going to be like,
they're going to start mining it for film content, aren't
absolutely. So my dearest hope is that in that you get a bunch of Transformer wrestling moves, like, because why not?
Do you know what? If they get a good director in and it's well choreographed, that could be really fun.
The Rock could play Optimus Prime.
Oh my god,
Rocktimus Prime.
Rocktimus Prime.
The Rocktimus Prime.
I still think The Rock should come do our geology film.
Oh yeah, The Rock is a rock expert.
Yeah,
he wouldn't be typecast at all. Like he'd love that.
Yeah, it'd be great.
So art wise, going back, I love this rough drawing style.
Yes,
I don't know if it's a thing of like, do I objectively like it, or have I been conditioned to like it because I've read two great titles with it, and one especially that I particularly loved.
I think the thing that I really enjoyed about it is that it made it look a little bit vintage. So it made it look as though it had been drawn in the 80s, which is obviously so congruent with Transformers.
Yes. It couldn't be too modern, would look weird.
Yeah, I think too modern and too digital.
Which I think kind of was the point with the Michael Bay Transformer films. They looked too like pristine and shiny and metally, and we're used to like those kind of mutedest colors from the 80s.
Yeah, like, and again, I think once you go too realistic, you have to give them really robot-y faces, which don't emote very well.
No.
But here, even though they were like inherently very mechanical, they had quite naturalistic human-looking faces, if that makes sense.
It was a good big credit to the drawing that they put emotional expressions in these kind of static robot faces.
Yeah, they the faces emoted really well, didn't they? And I think if they'd gone for a more modern digital looking style, I couldn't confidently say whether this was drawn ink on paper or digitally.
No, but how it looked, the end result looks a certain way.
But the style they were gunning for was that kind of scratchier, I mean, very 80s.
Yeah. And I think that is Warren Johnson. That is just what his style is.
Yeah.
And I think he's definitely coming across that. I mean, it's rare to get those like artist-writers combos, but doing both really well.
Yeah.
And he's also got this very unique style, because you could be a writer-artist and I think people would excuse your art if it was a bit more like house style or a bit more run-of-the-mill, because it'd be like, well, you're writing as well, so like, well, fair enough.
This has been a feature of our conversation when we do mangas, which is that there'll be some panels that are really highly detailed, and then other moments where they cut corners and zoom out and everything looks a bit more chibi.
Yeah. And
again, that has to be like a time-saving thing, right?
Yes.
Whereas here, I feel like there was a lot of attention put on all aspects.
Absolutely. And that comes from a passion of the source material, like, again, wrestling. And I strongly suspect, I think I read at the end of the first issue, he's like a big Transformers fan as well.
Well, I suppose those things were popular at the same time, weren't they? Like the late 80s?
I'd say probably more 90s, like guessing. I think
Pro wrestling was big in the 80s, though, wasn't it?
It was big in a sense, because you had the Hulk Hogan original era.
Yeah.
But the 90s was kind of the most profitable, if you don't count now.
That was like WWE Raw.
90s was the Attitude Era. So that was The Rock and Stone Cold, who by far the biggest wrestling stars ever.
Yeah.
Like,
still huge names.
I mean, The Rock is still huge. Stone Cold, he didn't get into acting as much and stuff.
Yeah.
So he just kind of retired, and now he's but the fact, like, The Rock is famous for other reasons now. The fact that people still know Stone Cold now.
Yeah.
Like, you could say to a non-wrestling fan, like, Stone Cold Stunner, and they would know what you meant.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, Stone Cold Steve Austin, like, is still a pop cultural reference. Like, he turned up... Rick uses him as an insult in Rick and Morty, doesn't he?
Yeah.
All right, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Like, do you know, like, he's still kind of a cultural touchstone, certainly in American culture, isn't he?
And you compare it to the other big stars like John Cena, Batista, like those people, they had acting careers afterwards, which that launched them into the wider public. But The Rock and Stone Cold were known just for their wrestling. So, yeah. I always appreciate another pro wrestling tangent. I'll have to put in the episode description. Speaking about the colors, I found the colors were interestingly right in the middle between... They weren't too contrasting, but they weren't muted either.
I think I mean, obviously, there's a lot of those big primaries because of Optimus Prime being red and blue.
But I didn't feel like it was like sharp or overly bright or overly contrasting ever.
No, it really had that kind of quite saturated, no, not overly saturated, kind of low contrast ink on paper feel, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So everything was quite blocked out and quite, there was a lot of primary colours here, like lots of red and lots of blue, but there wasn't a lot of vibrancy, was there? Which...
Yeah. And it's going to be weird because if they do these big crossovers, it probably is going to be a different artist. So the Transformers is going to look very different potentially.
Because this, I mean, for me, this looked notably better than the Void Rivals art.
Yeah. And again, I think I just like this art better than that one.
Although one thing I will say is that I didn't enjoy the way this was laid out.
That's interesting. I didn't notice it as much.
There was a lot of pages that had like maybe 7 or 8 horizontal panels with panels inset over the top of a bigger illustration that they were kind of interrupting. There was a lot of stuff happening with the layouts, but it just didn't scan that well for me. I mean, again, because I read digitally now, often on a phone, I think that really inhibits my enjoyment of a lot of things because I'm constantly having to zoom in and move around the page.
Yeah, I read on a laptop, so it's definitely better, I think, for that.
Yeah.
I like the explosions, big use of color, and it felt very like chaotic and stuff. In terms of the layout, there were points like in fights, like the big fights, where I couldn't tell exactly what was happening. But I feel like that was intentional.
Yeah, and
or at least a nice byproduct.
I sometimes struggled to tell who was who between the Autobots and the Decepticons.
Yes.
Because to be honest with you, when you get cut down to the core of it, when they're in their robot forms, Transformers all kind of look the same.
But that becomes a plot point, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
So it all does feel like it's supportive of like the entire thing.
Oh, I think the art was really congruent with the story. Like I think the art was a really great way of displaying what was happening on the page.
Yeah. I like the old school sound effects, but they're done in like a rough drawn crayon kind of way, like sketchy kind of look. Without getting too into it, because I will be touching on this later. There's some slightly more violent sound effects.
Yeah,
and those look like really kind of harrowing in little points.
Do you know, I didn't really notice the sound effects as much as you did.
I didn't notice at first, and then I kind of realized like there was like a weird color because they weren't like outlined, and that's what I mean by kind of like a rough sketch kind of thought. There'd be these drawn words like smash or bam or whatever. But it would actually spill out from the panel, so it'd be in the white parts as well. That. Yeah. So, but again, like that's so subtle that I didn't notice even immediately myself.
Yeah. I often tune that kind of stuff out a bit in comic books, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah, and I think that is part of it. Like if it's done really well, I suppose you get the feeling of it without being like it says smash and letters behind them or whatever.
Yeah, I often tune them out a bit. I don't know if it's because we've read a lot of superhero stuff.
I think this was intentionally done so it looks like part of the chaos.
Yeah,
and I think that is is a good way to do them.
And in fairness, watching two Transformers fight, at a certain point, you are just watching two big blobs of primary color smash into each other.
Yes, and it does help that a lot of the Transformers are a bit grey as share a lot of metallic grey.
Yeah.
So you do, but I think the story does a lot of heavy lifting by kind of showing you contextually who's who and what's going on.
And they all have pretty distinct personalities.
Yeah, I mean, Decepticons are cartoonishly evil, which I think is a callback to
they're cartoonishly evil, but I think to get into the story a little bit.
Yeah, I'm done with that. So yeah.
Megatron is dead.
Yes.
So Megatron is historically the leader of the Decepticons.
Or do we know dead or just missing? Is it not intentionally not mention what's happened to him?
Yeah, sorry. So I just assumed dead, but Megatron is not there.
Now we're at the story, and it sounds like you're starting already. What was the story of this arc?
So essentially, some humans discover a big ship full of not dead but dormant Transformers.
Yep.
And some of the Autobots and some of the Decepticons start to revive themselves, and they are fighting for resources essentially. So none of them
trying to kill each other. Generally.
Yeah. So none of them have enough energon.
And energon, yes.
Energon,
which I think is just electricity.
I think potentially, yeah.
Yeah, it's never explicitly stated, but I got that sense.
None of them have enough juice.
Yes.
To restore their whole armies, so they're all kind of under-equipped, and they're they're jostling for resources. The Autobots make friends with a bunch of humans, a couple of human children particularly.
Mm-hmm.
And that really informs the way they go about their war campaign, because they're always kind of, looking out for these humans that they've befriended. The Decepticons are really just there to fuck shit up.
Yep, just a bunch of arseholes.
But the Decepticons, other than the leader dude, Starscream, I think. Starscream.
Yeah. It's the only name I remember of the Decepticons.
Yeah, so Starscream is very tyrannical.
Mm.
I would agree with you that he's cartoonishly evil, but the rest of the Decepticons all seem a bit more grounded, and there's this running theme where all of them keep saying to him, well, Megatron wouldn't have done this. And he's like, I don't want to hear you say his name in front of me.
Yeah, his insecurity about Megatron is a good little character trait.
Yes, and so it does feel that he's like way more unhinged than the rest of them. The rest of them are a bit more sensible and a little bit more conservative, whereas he's very unhinged.
And he was just like, I'm the leader now.
Yeah.
And everyone went, all right, fine.
And then obviously on the Autobot side, there are some classic Autobots there.
Yeah.
Most notably Optimus.
Yeah, the only other, the other most famous one I think everyone would know would be Bumblebee, and either he's dead or he's just not been awakened yet, and we can't
see him because Optimus Prime runs to grab him.
Yeah,
so we see Bumblebee's limp body. Bumblebee was very much an other-ran Transformer. He wasn't. I think in the 80s people liked him because he was a VW Beetle.
Yes, I think so, yeah.
He was some kind of like proletariat car. And so, he transformed into a car that like there's a high chance your dad could have owned.
Yes.
When you were a kid in the 80s or whatever. I think he was a VW. But he wasn't as big in the Transformers universe as he ended up being because of the
movies.
Yeah, the live action ones.
Yeah.
The M. Night Shyamalan. Michael Bay.
M. Night Shyamalan would have been like, turns out they were robots the whole time.
Yeah,
right
this is it. So he wasn't as prevalent in the earlier stuff as he came to be in the later stuff.
Yeah.
So I think what we're seeing here is a pretty accurate representation of some of the fan favorites.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Yeah, there was the guy with the cassette player, which was like a little robot. I think they were quite popular, probably because the toy had a little cassette that also transformed.
Yeah.
So obviously you remember those toys like more specifically, don't you? Basically the story, which I think the plot points regarding anything like we need to get the machine running and we need to revive our people and oh no, they've revived their people and stuff. All that stuff I don't think mattered nearly as much as the relationships between the characters. And I think that was by design.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there's some plot points that I really kind of looked at and thought, oh, that doesn't make a whole lick of sense. But they arrived at them briefly.
Yeah.
And glossed over them briefly.
Yes.
And I suppose there's, in terms of plot, there's not a whole lot going on here. Really, is there?
The plot, like I said, it's more about the character relationships across the humans and the Transformers. Is there anything more general story you want to get into before we get into spoilers or anything?
Not unless you do.
General points. I think I noticed that the Transformers spoke quite expositionally, but I feel like that again you could put down to them. That is what they're like.
Yeah.
There's little weird points where like the Transformers seem to speak English, which is one of those things you just have to.
I was going to talk about this.
That's one of those things I think you do just have to forgive with things like this, because it's like a thing in the Marvel universe where all space aliens seem to speak English.
Yeah.
But when they're on Earth, you'll have like language barriers if they go to like a non-English speaking country. So then it's like, well, what's going on here? And there's this thing of like, oh, you assume they've all got like multi-world translators or something, multi-language translators.
Yeah, and like the idea that Thor speaks English as opposed to Old Norse,
Yeah, exactly.
Like he'd probably be speaking something closer to modern day Icelandic.
Yeah.
I think, and that's always a bit jarring. I mean, I felt the same way the whole way through Saga as well. They're going through all these different planets and all these different races, and they all have different dialects of English, but they all kind of speak English.
Yeah, it's definitely more noticeable when you have Earth. Earth has a anchor point.
Yes.
Because then you're comparing languages to how we know languages.
Yeah. And again, there's a point made of it, because there's a point where Optimus Prime is talking with the humans really early on, and one of them talks about a dad, and he's like, "Oh, a dad, I don't know this concept."
Mm.
And so they do touch on the fact that even though they speak English, they don't know the words for concepts they wouldn't understand.
Yes.
And you have to take a minute and screw your eyes up and go, right, that makes logical sense, but it also makes no sense at all.
Yeah. No, and that was the point I was going to make. So yeah, stuff like that I think was kind of general. Otherwise, I think we will have to get into the beats of the story. So spoilers for issues 1 to 6 of Transformers from now. I think it's generally, I'd say, worth reading, even if you have no inclination to Transformers or anything. We were both surprised by how much we liked it. So take that for whatever you will, and I'd say check it out. And also, it might win the Eisner Award. So you want to read
Which one's it up for?
Ongoing series.
Best ongoing series. Yeah. Fuck. So that's going to be up against
Nightwing.
Oh my god! No, because Nightwing's up for one issue, isn't it? Specifically,
no, both.
Right, so it's gonna be up against Nightwing, which we both really liked.
Yeah, Wonder Woman, I think. The Wonder Woman we read. So that I think is another Eisner one we read beforehand. Naturally, Tom King's gonna get in the awards.
Yeah, I don't remember liking that as much.
It wasn't his best, no. And there's a couple of others which I think we'll hopefully touch on at some point. But yeah, if you want to read an possibly Eisner Award winner before wins and have that extra street cred,
that nerd
cred. So yeah, spoilers from here on in. So the point you wanted to make,
we can just kind of mosey around the story for a bit.
So I think this kind of counts as a spoiler but it's a general thing about the comic, but I did not expect it. How violent it is.
Yeah, it is quite violent, isn't it? There's a lot of Decepticons crushing humans.
I think they've kind of noticed that even though there is toys to be sold for this, I think they're really towing the line of like most people who are into Transformers are adults who remember it from their childhoods.
Yeah, I think their toy market here is more, it's adults buying collectibles more than children buying toys, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think they're really pushing the boat on the violence, because you would not get this if this was strictly for children. You would not get some of the violence we got here, which is basically just people getting squished.
Yeah, basically. Have you seen some of the new Transformers toys that are coming though?
No idea.
They transform.
That they've always transformed, haven't they?
Themselves.
Oh, okay.
Like you tell Optimus to they have voice recognition built into them.
Yeah.
And so you tell Optimus to transform and he transforms.
I've seen an automatic a self-transforming robot before. It wasn't a proper transformer. Yeah. It was like this is like a initial design kind of thing. I've seen that on Reddit, but yeah, it makes sense that they would get to this point naturally. I mean, but then part of the fun is like it's cool to see that, but part of the fun is also transforming them,
manipulating them. Yeah. Exactly. I don't think I ever owned any Transformers. And again, all of the Transformers that I saw were like friends' older brothers who were a bit older and collected them, and they were like on shelves, and you didn't fucking fuck with that shit because you knew they were delicate and really breakable. The work to break off the one piece that makes the entire transforming impossible now is like the deadliest sin, I would imagine. Absolutely. But no, I mean, I get it. Like, if they were just cynically using this as a toy marketing vehicle, which is what the original Transformers was, right? In the 80s, the cartoons. Yeah. Now I think there's going to be an advert for the films. Yeah, and potentially, that's sort of. I mean, again, that the way that toys are marketed has really changed now, because you're not allowed to target ads at children the same way you were in the 80s and 90s, are you? No, it's get a media property off the ground with films or kids' cartoons, and then like advertise it that way. Just like, hey, you love this film or cartoon? Here's the toys. Yeah, and absolutely. Kids go, I need these now. And you see it really cynically. I noticed it in like the Star Wars films. Those little penguin things on the island, on the planet that. Or even like Baby Yoda and the little droids, they are marketed that way. You look at them and you go, they wrote that in entirely so they'd have plushies to sell, right? Yeah, 100%. But yeah, that all made me, as I said, so surprised that the violence was as strong as it was. Yeah, because, there was a lot of like gun-based violence. There was a lot of like crushing, big robots crushing humans. The sound effect, there would literally be like a red colored word effect would be like squish or something like that when it happens. And then one of the humans getting hurt was really galling as well. Yeah, definitely. So there's these two humans, there's Spike and Carly. Yes. And so Spike's dad is basically part of a rural militia
Yeah.
that forms very quickly in the back of a bar to fight the Decepticons.
Which I prefer because the Transformers films were always like the proper military getting involved.
Yeah.
And the military just suddenly be like, well, they're alien robots, but we think they're on our side, so we're going to fight. I believe that more from a local militia than I do like the military.
A local militia all going around going, well, they seem safe.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, the local lads with guns, it takes them a little longer to warm to the robots.
Yeah, and that was like very appropriate and realistic that they see an Autobot and they just go, oh, it's one of those evil robots, and just start shooting the hell out of them and doing nothing at all, really.
And it's one of the smaller Autobots as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Who they really shoot. But
cliff diver or cliff jumper?
Cliff jumper, yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's a shootout happening between the Autobots, the Decepticons, and then this militia. And Spike gets shot with a real human bullet by one of the militia. And then, Prime Optimus rushes him to hospital, and they get to the hospital, and one of the Decepticons completely trashes the generator.
And so sets fire to the hospital, which was kind of a harrowing thing because one, like, the credit to the writing, and again why I meant about the plot points being more the character stuff, was you sensed the distress from Optimus and the Autobots when the Decepticons are like, oh, is this one of those, like, the working out, like, this is where they repair the little squishy ones. So it's like, let's bloody set fire to it. And you really do feel Optimus Prime being like, no. Like,
and that kid's there. And they go quite deep on the medical stuff. So we see a panel where they're like, oh, we're intubating him, and it's like dire. And then this generator gets taken out, and they said, well, he's stable, but he's going to die, and a bunch of other people in this hospital are going to die if we don't power it. And Optimus uses the last of his energon.
Yeah,
like
that's the Allspark. That's a different thing. Yeah.
So he gives him the Allspark.
Yes.
So the Allspark is their actual life force. So they can run out of energon, but they go dormant.
Prime. I think that's Optimus. So I think the Optimus. His name is just Optimus.
Optimus. Yeah.
The Prime name title, I guess.
Yeah.
That I think comes with the Allspark.
Right.
So the Allspark is like this thing they can use to potentially rebuild their home or something. It's very important for reasons that haven't been properly disclosed yet.
Yeah. And again, this is Transformers deep lore. I imagine if we were super into Transformers, we would know all of this.
Yeah. Which is like, oh yeah, the Allspark, obviously.
Yeah.
Like, we're very tentatively like, the Allspark? And
so is the Allspark the thing that he spits out later in the...
Yes.
So that is the Allspark. It's like a physical thing.
Yeah, I believe so, yeah. Because I've seen that kind of stuff in the films and what have you. But yeah, the real harrowing point with the hospital, and there's a lot of scenes which I think do a really great job of getting across specifically Optimus Prime's like depth as a character and his, what do you call it, feeling for his empathy.
Yeah.
So he's very much we've brought this war. I think it's his character basically across all mediums. He's like, we've brought this war to these people, like they didn't ask for it, so it's our job to like protect them from the war we've brought.
He's basically robot military Jesus.
Yeah,
he's military robot Jesus, isn't he?
He's not that military. Like, I suppose he is, fulfilling a military role, isn't he? But he's not exactly like ordering people about. Like, they're following his commands, but he's not having to be like, get over there and protect the bridge or whatever.
Yes. No, you are right.
But there's one scene in particular I thought was great, and it's the deer scene.
Oh,
so
yeah.
For listeners, and it contrasts well with these two events that happen quite close to each other. So Optimus Prime, and they explicitly show them like in a montage kind of thing later. But so what happens, for anyone who hasn't read it, Optimus Prime, when he first kind of gets away from the Decepticons with Spike, and they're in a cave or something, and he's coming out of the cave, and he accidentally steps on a deer. And the deer is dead. Like, it's been crushed to death immediately. And immediately, I'm kind of like, that's bad. But then a immediate reaction from Optimus Prime, he's like, oh my God, what have I done? And he picks it up tenderly, and he's like looking at it. And Spike comes over, and he's like, he saw it happen. He's like, hey, you stepped on it, like, it's an accident, like, sucks. But Optimus Prime is so like, I didn't know. Like, we come from a metal world, and I didn't think the ground is soft, and I didn't think I had to look out for things to step on, and he's like so affected by this. And then they contrast it later with Starscream picking up a guy and just crushing him. And his reaction is like, whoa, there's little guys we can crush. Like, this is great. Like,
I mean, that's when they start calling them squishies. They're like, oh my God, the life forms here are squishy.
Yes.
We can just...
Yeah, and I think it's simple but effective.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, it's broad stroke stuff, isn't it? But it works. And I think that specific scene really stuck with me as well, because it was really well drawn, and there was a lot of depth.
You felt like in single panels how carefully Optimus was picking up the dead deer.
Yeah, and I think they achieved something really special there, where they painted something in quite broad strokes and really obviously wanted to elicit a response from us as readers, but they did so with a lot of humanity and depth.
Yes.
And yeah, I agree with you. I thought that was really affecting. And then the fact that Optimus came back to that later in the text when he saw Spike dying in the hospital. And again, it's like, he felt the weight of the fragility of these,
squishies.
Yeah. He felt the weight of the fragility of life on this planet that he was on.
And especially he feels guilt and remorse for it. And that's like his driving thing after that. The other plot point I thought made me realize how kind of economic the kind of plotting of the story was, is you have Starscream crushing just a random guy when he first turns up at this electrical place where Spike's dad is. And there's this other character who's like just a mate of Spike's dad who gets crushed. And it uses very well, showing Starscream just like enjoying the violence.
Yeah.
I thought it was such a good use of the story where later that guy turns out to be Carly's dad.
Yeah.
Because I did not see that coming.
No.
And then when the reveal happened, you go, of course their dads would be friends. This is a small town. Like,
this is a rural community.
Exactly. And then it gives Carly this kind of investment into the war that's happening, because now she hates Starscream and his side. I thought it was really good.
This is before the rest of the adult humans had really cottoned on to the fact the Autobots were okay.
Yes.
And so this was a big driving force for them being like, Carly, why are you associating with these robots? One of them killed your dad.
Yeah.
And it's her being like, well, no, they're okay, I promise.
There's two sides to this.
Yeah, they seem sound. And so, killing her dad off was really powerful on a lot of levels, wasn't it? Because not only did we get to experience her grief with her, but we also it was used as a pretty potent plot point.
And I think that is the biggest selling point of this entire comic for anyone who, again, still hasn't read it. There's the plot points with regards to the specific Transformers story. And that, for me, was very much our people are down and their people are down, and we need to get energy to bring our people back, and they have a computer that brings their back, and I have the Allspark that can do this, and really, like, all that stuff. That is how it scanned to me. Yeah. But it's the character stuff in between that I was like, what's happening next?
Yes.
Like, what's going to happen to these people, to these Transformers? Like, are they going to be all right? I didn't care about like where they're going to get the energy from, but I cared a lot about like, is Spike going to be okay? And
seeing him wake up at the end of issue 6 was really lovely, wasn't it? It brought a lot of closure to that arc for me.
It was a good kind of point of like, that arc's ended, the next one's about to start.
Yeah. So there was something that they did in service of all this that I thought was a little sloppy.
Okay.
It was Spike's dad's sacrifice.
Yep, I was literally going to exactly say this.
So Optimus is down, he's out, he's telling everyone, I can feel the true spark. The Allspark leaving, like, this is my time. And he spits the Allspark out and says, one of you needs to take up the mantle of being the Prime. And Spike's dad climbs into the Allspark.
I guess so.
He climbs into it, and then I suppose it's kind of. It's a fairly, in terms of fantasy, it's a really common trope. Yeah, the idea of a life for a life.
Yeah, I did not understand what was happening. Like,
I
inferred what was happening correctly. Like, I got what was going on and the results and the weight and the after effects and everything. When it was happening, I was just like, do humans power Allspark?
Well, this is it, isn't it? It doesn't make any sense, because the quiet implication throughout the whole thing is that the Transformers crash landed on this planet a fuck of a long time ago, I assume.
Yeah.
And have been down and out for a while.
Yeah.
And then they meet the humans. But yeah, it just, It just struck me as a bit weird. And again,
I feel like they just jumped a bunch of points there.
Yeah. And I suppose on some level, if they had given us a really detailed explanation of how that worked, we would now be sat here calling shenanigans on it.
Maybe.
And I have said before that actually sometimes when these big, like, comic booky shenanigan-y things happen, I sometimes prefer it if it's not explained to me super well.
Do you know what I just realized as well?
What's
Do you know
that?
what Spike's dad's name is? Or his nickname, what everyone calls him?
Yeah.
It's Sparky.
Yeah, it's Sparky. Yeah.
Sparky climbs into the Allspark.
Oh, for fuck's sake, yeah. And I suppose he's Sparky because he's an electrician.
Yes.
Oh, so it kind of makes sense that he would look at that thing and be like, oh, that's electricity.
Yeah, I that was the plot hole there for me really is, why did Sparky even have the idea in the first place? Like, it worked, obviously it worked, but what about that situation did he look at and go, oh, if I crawl into it, it'll be fine? Like,
it just
there was no clues for that at all.
It didn't make a whole lick of sense, did it? And that's okay. Like, not everything. I'm just kind of quiet, sat a little bit on your dog. It just did. Yeah, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But again, as I've just said, like, part of me thinks that, well, if they'd really gone out of their way to explain it, I'd have been complaining about that at this point.
Yeah, that was the one part it seemed so egregious because the rest of it was so good.
Yeah,
it just felt like this one obvious point of confusion. I was like, why is this happening?
Yeah, and I suppose, you know, we are very well versed in comic book shenanigans at this point.
Yes.
And so, you know, 1 in a 6-issue run, it's, you know, very much a sci-fi fantasy kind of title. I can forgive it, I think.
Yeah, the rest of it, the quality of the rest of it absolutely excuses this one error, I would say.
I don't know if it's an error. I just feel like it wasn't sufficiently explained within the context of the story. But again, they rattled through a lot in those 6 parts.
So we just had a slight error because I plugged in the charger to my laptop, which for the first time I've done while recording, apparently it stops the recording for a second.
Yeah, that's weird.
And unfortunately I did it right. I thought I was going to be really, like, stealthy doing it while
I
you were talking.
watched you doing it.
Yeah, but it turns out it stopped it and you didn't remember exactly what you were saying.
No.
So you will have just heard a cut off and then us talking now. So that's why.
You affected the true spark of the computer.
You literally only missed, I think, like half a sentence. But, like, that's how quickly we responded to it. We didn't just like waffle on for an hour and then go, oh shit, it hasn't recorded.
Oh no, oh god. Have we ever had a massive cataclysmic failure where we've done like most of an episode and lost it?
We almost did. We had an episode where I still to this day have no idea what happened, but every part, so without getting technical sound editing bollocks, every part, like every item within the recording was at like 1.03 speed.
I remember that one because you sent it to me and I was like, hey buddy.
Yeah. And it was so small that neither of us clocked that it was faster. It just sounded weird. Neither of us said, oh, it's sped up, because it was such a small amount we didn't know. Yeah. But it just sounded off.
No, I thought I clocked that it was sped up.
I think we just said it sounded off.
Yeah, and then you had to go back and...
Because I was looking through it to be like, what's different? And I literally like got the raw recording, like edited it and built it up the same way again, and was trying to look at the differences between the two. And it was just, and I literally, only when I went under properties, because the speed of the recording, the playback was the same. That was normal. But the properties of the item, every item was sped up.
I remember.
have no idea what
I remember when you sped it up a few cents and sent me a proof just to see if I'd notice it, and it took me like 25 seconds, and I was like, right, why have you done this?
And we've been over that.
I don't think I know anything about. I don't think it's an interesting enough topic that we ever would have brought it up on air.
No, we're not going to know that much too.
But it's wild. We've done 71 of these.
There's 71st episode. One of them was a barely literate episode, which was like a half-hour add-on to. Like we released the same week.
Right, I remember
so that counts. So I guess we've done one less episode for weeks.
So we're on 69 full episodes, 1 barely literate episode, and 1 award show.
Yes.
That's kind of impressive.
This one comes out, it'll be 70 episodes and 1 barely literate.
Yeah, so 69 full episodes.
When people are listening to this, it'll be 70 full episodes and 1 barely literate episode.
Yeah, so 69 normal episodes, 1 award show. and one barely literate.
Oh, yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. I count the award show as a proper episode.
I suppose.
It's part of the thing, isn't it?
It's part of the vibe.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just mental that we've been doing this for that long.
Yeah. So back to the comic, which luckily we haven't had to use that barely at all.
No,
this has been doing good comics.
Yeah, it's been the past month has been very comic-heavy, comic literate.
But we're going to get in all the eyes. I think we want to get as many Eisner Award nominees as possible before it happens.
Yeah, and I must admit, I think actually like going through that list and picking out stuff that we think is going to get Eisners, and then going through everything that's nominated is really profitable. Well, it just gives us a bunch of interesting material to talk about.
Yeah.
I don't think there's been a week where we've talked about one of these Eisner nominees that we've gotten bored of talking about the comic and gone off other places that much.
No, not at all. No, I don't think any of them have been, we felt differently, like, they shouldn't have been nominated. I think if at best, I think Tom King's Wonder Woman is not his best work.
Yeah.
But I think it was still pretty good compared to most superhero ongoing titles.
I think that was one where I went into it with a pretty dim view. And then by the time I'd spent an hour talking about it with you, I was like, oh, no, there's actually a lot to be celebrated here.
Yeah. But we got to the bottom of what didn't work about it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, like this one, there's not a lot that didn't work for me. The only thing that really didn't land was that plot point with Sparky.
And again, it's so obvious because the quality is so high around that point, like all around it. So it does feel like a mistake happened, or they had to rush like a point because they realized they couldn't fit it all in, or and something like that.
One of the things that I really enjoy about it tonally is that the kind of cartoonish villainy of the Decepticons plays off really nicely against the more human content that we see in the Autobot camp.
Yeah.
That it really does make it feel like we are seeing two distinct camps and two distinct kind of arcs play out.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really fun as a reader.
Oh, yeah.
And I never thought I would have liked that because, I like congruence of tone. And so actually having those moments where the Decepticons are just being, particularly Starscreamer, is just being like pornographically evil.
Well, there's a specific point for me where it goes from Saturday morning cartoon evil to like a deeper evil. Yeah. And that's the point where, so there's a point where they've just had a fight with the Autobots. The Autobots have outnumbered them now because the roster seems to slowly building them in the background, which is explained. I just maybe didn't understand it as well. But the Autobots outnumber the Decepticons, so they rush back. They carry one of their wounded back. They get back to the base of the ship. And they're talking about like, we need like more firepower. It's like, well, we can't. Like, we've got the energy, but we ain't got the materials to like get the bigger hitters like back online. And then they realize slowly while talking, because there's the wounded one who's like, are you gonna bloody like fix me up or something? And they slowly realize, oh, we can use him.
Yeah,
and that it makes it kind of like a horror like scene-esque for a bit, where they just literally pull him apart.
They cannibalize one of their own.
And that was a moment where I went, bloody hell, like, this is like getting hardcore now.
They cannibalize their friend for parts.
And again, you don't see the violence, but the concept is gotten across.
You see the violence, I think, in the scariest way. You see it in Shadow.
Yes, and he's screaming off camera, off panel.
Exactly. He's screaming off panel, and you see in the shadow Starscreamer with like half of him.
Yeah.
And that, I agree with you. That's truly evil, isn't it?
I'd tell you what's smart as well. They do extra violence on the robots. Like that prime example. But also Optimus Prime at one point, his arm is like hanging off and he rips it off and then he beats a Decepticon with his severed arm.
And then he gets a new arm with a big old gun on it.
Yep, that gun is very cool. And like a toy from back in the day. Like you could like put it on him. There's a bit where a big Decepticon has got someone's leg and they want to close a door, and the guy says, like, just shouting them like, close the door, like, don't worry about my leg, and it just cuts his leg off and he screams.
That huge green Decepticon is so cool, because I think that's something that...
Was it Devastator or something like that? From the Constructicons. Yeah,
so I'd never really considered that there was that vast amount of size variance in amongst the Transformers.
I only know that because of films. One of them I didn't see, but there was one that was like a planet size, and Orson Welles, like his one as well.
Yeah, and so, but I think this really did a good job of displaying that and actually, you know, showing the size variance. And I'd noticed that a lot of the Decepticons can fly.
Yeah, they seem to all be jets. So there's a thing early on where they use a computer and they download schematics of Earth.
Yeah.
So it seems like a defensive, like an evolutionary kind of defensive thing, where it's like, first things first, get the schematics of technology that we can disguise as.
Yeah.
So I think that the Decepticons naturally gravitate towards like jets and military stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas the Autobots are more like just cars
Domestic
and trucks
stuff.
and things to get around in. Yeah. So it definitely thematically works.
Yeah.
The last kind of major point I was going to make is, and I realized one of these as we were talking, but the connections to the large Energon universe. So the one is, we mentioned up top, a G.I. Joe reference. There's a character called Duke who has his own series, which apparently is very good. Just a little 5-issue miniseries, so we might cover that at some point. He's one of the jet fighters that ejects from a jet fighting the Decepticons.
Oh.
And he uses a jetpack thing to avoid getting squished, because the first guy just gets crushed. He avoids that and he like shoots at the Decepticons. The Decepticons like, hey, bloody hell, this is a inconvenience now. And he gets away, and you see the name on the thing is Duke. And I read that, I went, that makes me want to read his miniseries now, which is the whole point.
Badass.
Well, and it's the whole point of this multi-universe stuff, isn't it? It's like introduce the characters in the more popular, the Transformers one, and then go, by the way, he's got his own miniseries. And I literally went, I want to read that now.
Yeah, I didn't clock that it was him.
There's other one, the one I realized while we were talking, so the whole story with the Transformers starts because one of the characters, I can't remember their name, turns up, finds the ship, and is like, I've been gone for years, hundreds of years potentially, and I've just found you guys again.
Yeah.
I just realized he was in Void Rivals.
Oh, okay.
Remember when they're stranded on the planet?
Yeah.
They awaken the Transformer, and he just goes, bloody hell, I've got to go, and he flies off.
That's that guy. Right, okay.
And I literally worked that out while we were talking. Like, we mentioned Void Rivals, and I just kind of clicked. I was like, oh, yeah. So
the big white one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, now I remember him.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting, like, if you read Void Rivals, you'll know why that started all this.
So they're almost doing a more kind of clean, subtle job of this than Marvel, but certainly than DC do, because DC will do a thing a lot where when somebody appears or they reference an event, they'll give you the page number and issue number of where you can go find that.
Yeah.
Which always slaps of like just them trying to sell comics. Whereas here, we're seeing these characters pop up.
Yeah.
But they're just sort of letting us work it out, right?
I will say I think it's much easier to do at this stage where you're starting, because DC and Marvel, they've got this decades-long history they have to reference.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, it's starting fresh now, so it's a lot easier. It's a lot neater to like do this stuff with.
Yes.
So again, I think that's all the main stuff. We do have, as we always do in this podcast, which I'm just bringing up now, is the bit where I bring up some last minute details.
Yeah.
And obviously we've got a theme for that,
as we do with everything, yeah.
Yep. And the theme, which I've obviously written down just to remember the words. So, you are trying to wrap up the episode because you think we're done. Yeah. And I go, hold up. Ryan's checked his notes and he's got a few things to say before we wrap up this episode and both get on with our day. That is it.
I mean, that's my favourite one that we've been doing for 71 episodes.
It's the best one that we do every episode.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Totally.
So, last minute little details which I thought was good. There's one Autobot called Jazz, and he makes music puns.
Yeah, and when he said we should go to the 5?
Yes, yeah.
So
that take 5?
No. So in music, when you're in a key signature, you talk about chord. Every chord will have a number within the key signature. So when you're in the key of C, C is the 1 chord. Going to the 5 is like the 5 chord is a really tonic chord in a chord progression, because to make basically when you're constructing chords, the 1, the 3, and the 5. Those 3 scale degrees are like the most important scale degrees for making a major chord. So if you take a C note and you want to make a major chord out of it, you find the 3, you find the 5, you play those 3 notes together, you get a chord triad. And so the 5 is like a really tonic chord in a chord progression. And so going to the 5 is like you're going to a chord that isn't home but feels close to home, and it resolves back to home really nicely. And so, like, yeah, when he said take it to the 5, I was like, yeah, that makes sense.
And now we understand why the reference was good.
Yeah.
Thank God. Thank God we have that. It was fun. And it was interesting that it wasn't the guy with the cassette in his chest.
Right? Yeah, no. And I did, and you know what? I really wanted to talk about jazz and his chord and his music references. So thank you for bringing that up.
No problem. And the other one was one little part which I thought was funny. There wasn't a lot of funny in this, but there was one part that did make me laugh. It was Starscream is confronting Cliff Jumper or Cliff Diver, whatever his name is, and Carly shouts at Starscream, goes, "You killed my dad." And Starscream goes, "Haha, yeah, I did." And he goes, "Wait, what's a dad?" I just love that, like, "You killed my whoever." And he's just like, "Yes, brilliant." And he's, "Wait, what? Like, what was that?"
And then he says, "Kill dad."
Yeah, kill Cliff Jumper, kill you next, or something like that. Yeah, but I thought that was funny, that the proper facial expression of like, "Haha, wait, what?"
What's a dad?
Yeah. So, yep, those are my last little points, and I think we've covered all the major points. I think there's a lot of little stuff that is definitely worth checking out. If by this point you're still listening and you haven't read it, still a lot more to get out from it. And also, I'm going to add this to my list of ones to continue as well.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I think now that I've read some of the Void Rivals and I've read some of this, I probably would be more interested to go and have a look at some of the G.I. Joe stuff.
Oh yeah, we'll do that next. Yeah,
and just kind of have a little poke around this wider universe, because it is cool. It is cool that they're taking two really old. Well, I mean, at this point, really old. Like Transformers is 40 years old now.
Yep, and this does feel like a rejuvenation of a proper revival.
Yeah,
of it. And they're going in interesting directions again with a bit more violence in this one. It feels like a lot weightier story.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel like there's one point. Oh, another little point. There's one point where they get the Decepticons get the 5 constructor bots or whatever, and he goes, "Behold, my new toys." And I was like, all right, you did there, all right.
I see what you did there.
Down. But that was literally like, here's the new lineup of things you can buy.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
Yeah, but yeah, really enjoyed it, and looking forward, obviously, to exploring the Energon universe in its entirety.
Yep, so we can finally understand what an Allspark is and what it does.
And why people power us for some reason. So yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. I've had a lovely time. I hope you've had a lovely time too. If you'd like to keep having a lovely time with us, you can go to our YouTube channel, where we make shorts all the bloody time. We also have a TikTok. You can email us, comicliterate@gmail.com. Is that enough calls to action?
If you like it and you want to leave a review, that'd be great.
You just love the calls to action, don't you?
Oh, well, you didn't even do the anti-call to action.
No, I didn't, because I want to find a way to make you happy at the end, but also have an ending that feels like creatively congruent with the thing that we make. You know?
Yeah, but then also SEO and synergy,
synergy
and all that.
Synergy,
it's very important, isn't it? So
yeah, I mean,
algorithm.
Can we circle back around to this?
We'll put a pin in it now,
and then we can run it up the poll later.
Yeah, we'll circle back once we've had some time to brainstorm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ugh. Corporate.
We've both been there.
This is actually a corporate podcast.
Yeah. We're getting paid by Big Comic Book.
Yeah, we're getting paid by Big Comic. Big Inkies.
Yes. And if you wonder, well, which one of the big two? Big. Just big comic.
Yeah, it runs deeper than just Marvel or DC, doesn't it?
This thing goes way higher than... This thing goes all the way to the top.
The tippity topperest.
To bloody Optimus Prime.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you, goodbye.